somebody that hadn't been progressively exposed to this for 30 years, they probably couldn't live here. What we're experiencing now isn't a seasonal surge. I feel bad for America. Well, my great-grandparents came in 1894. We raised beef cattle. Our ranch is about 16,000 acres. We have 10.5 miles of the international border. We have 17 miles of pipeline to provide water for the cattle and wildlife, because the illegals break the water floats or break the pipe to get a drink, then they just let it run. And then while I'm checking the water lines, I got to check the gates and fences, and illegals are cutting the fences again. That's a new deal since Biden took office. We've had a lot of things stolen. We've had a lot of vehicles stolen. This barn's been broken. We don't even lock it anymore. We lock the houses. But somebody's always here. Nobody can leave the ranch without somebody being here. You go out in the morning, you check what's in your truck. Somebody laying in my truck or under the truck or in my wife's car, or are they out here? Every time you open the door, you kind of look. We don't ever let our guard down. We got a gun at every door. We got a gun under the bed. We sleep with 2 dogs. That's our alarm. We've had 14 dead bodies on the ranch that I know of. That was a game changer for me when I found the first dead illegal. Still disheartening to find somebody, but it's just, that's the way it is. I'm just sick of the whole thing, but I'm not leaving here. I feel bad for America, because they come through me every day, but they go live with you, and that's reality. And I don't know if I'd want a ranch anywhere else, period. This is home. I'm not leaving.
Please welcome to the stage Heritage Foundation Senior Advisor and Spokesperson, Genevieve Wood.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm so glad you returned after lunch. Thank you all for being here. For those of you who I've not got the chance to say hello to in person, hello. And it's so great to see so many of you again. Thank you all for making the trip to beautiful Orlando. Well, there's so much that the federal government is involved in, as we've heard on panels this morning, whether it's education, whether it's big tech, whether it's the economy. There's so much they do that they have no business doing. Right? Amen? And yet, one of the few things our Constitution, said in the preamble, says it's supposed to do is provide for the common defense. And whether we're talking about the border, whether we're talking about standing up to China, whether you're talking about what's happened in Afghanistan, this current administration is not providing for the common defense. And that's what we're going to talk about on this panel. We're going to talk about what they're not doing and what they need to be doing and how we're going to help force their hand to get it back on track. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome up my very distinguished panelist here, Chad Wolf. Chad, as you all know, is a former acting Secretary of U.S. Homeland Security, now a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. James Carafano, Vice President of our Davis Institute for Foreign Policy and National Security, and of course David Shedd, former Director of the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency and also a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Welcome, gentlemen. So Chad, let me begin with you. We just saw the border video, right. What's going on there, and there's a lot beyond what he spoke to. How would you assess what's happening on the border right now?
So it's difficult. Obviously, I've seen that video. It makes me both, very angry and disillusioned a little bit to see 4 years of very difficult and hard work accomplished during the last administration kind of thrown to the wayside here a little bit. So as I look at border security and really immigration enforcement, I think we're in a very dangerous place that we find ourselves in as we sit here. We have seen just a complete teardown of what I would say is border security measures that keep the border under control and keep it in a orderly process. And we've seen a complete gutting of enforcement of immigration laws. And so that not only takes place at the border, but it also takes place in the interior of the country. And so you have to ask yourself, why is that? And why are we seeing this now versus 5 years ago and 6 years ago? During the Obama administration, they didn't even go as far as the Biden administration is going when you talk about a lot of the measures that we've seen over the last 8 or 9 months. They were to the left and very liberal in some of their policies. This administration has gone far beyond that. And I think you can see the contrast because we're only 8 or 9 months away from the Trump administration. So you really are able to see a contrast in what works over the last 4 years and what absolutely does not work for the American people or this country right now. So I think, most people out there are sitting back and looking and saying, well, this is a complete disaster. How did we get here? And never, I think, have we seen such a stark contrast because we haven't seen an administration go so far left in how they view immigration enforcement, and border security. And we've never been so close to an administration that had done so much for those issues all at the same time that it's difficult to see. So I'm happy to dive into all of that, but it concerns me the direction that we're going down. I'll just end on a couple of points. One, we got a lot of press about Haitians in Del Rio, Texas, if you recall that, about 12,000 to 15,000 Haitians under a bridge. And for 2 weeks, a lot of media attention was on that. What I have to remind everyone is you had Haitians, or you had 12,000 entering the country every 2 days. Every 2 days, we have a new Haitian group coming into the country. So it's not just one period of time under a bridge in Del Rio. It's every 2 days. We're seeing about 12,000 folks trying to come into the border or trying to come into the country. And then at the end of the day, this is about human trafficking. And this is about illegal narcotics coming across the border and into every community in America. When you have 70,000 or more overdose deaths in American communities every day because of illegal drugs, and the vast majority, I would say 90% of them come across that southwest border, it's time to get real about what we need to do there to stop the cartels, to stop those transnational criminal organizations. And unfortunately, this administration is actually lining the pockets of those cartels. They make now, because of the mass human trafficking that we see across the border, those cartels are making roughly $14 million a day. Wow. A day that they continue to put back into their criminal enterprise. So, we talk a lot about children, we talk a lot about families crossing the border. This is about human trafficking, and this is about illegal narcotics coming across that border.
And I want to come back to the border specifically, but you bring up the issue on trafficking and the drugs. And David, Mexico is not just the problem, right? It's not just what's happening south of our border. It's what China is doing that's funneling a lot of this problem as well.
Well, having served 5 years in Mexico, I can tell you this relationship with China and its ability to use Mexico as a platform to inject into the United States, particularly fentanyl, of which I will raise Chad's number to about 97,000 who have died since March 2020 through March of 2021 off of opioids and illicit drugs. And the Chinese are very capable and very able in that they have modified the sending of fentanyl through Mexico to now supplying the precursor chemicals for the Mexican cartels to actually produce the fentanyl in Mexico. And then obviously they rack up their margins on the sales and this all goes to a much deeper point. This absence of security on the border has so many implications, of which, as Chad's already mentioned, not only is it the human trafficking, not only is it the drug trafficking, but these 14, 15 cartels, arguably in those numbers, are part of the ungoverned territory inside Mexico, in places like Sinaloa. And so the ability of the Chinese to use that as a platform to send those drugs all throughout the United States, to our cities, to our suburbs, and to our countryside, is something that is, I see no end in sight without addressing the larger issues associated with border controls and really going back to the basics of protecting the United States of America at its borders.
And yet, Jim, The Biden administration doesn't want to do anything about that, but they do now say they may want to give $450,000 to some of the illegal immigrants who've come in because they were separated as families.
Yeah, first I'd like to say I'm deeply upset. I like to sit on the far right side of the panel. I know, I'm sorry. I will answer your question, but I have to tell a story. It's not my fault that they decided to have this on Veterans Day. But for me, it's not Veterans Day. It's I Remember Dad Day. My dad fought in the Korean War. He was in the Army for a lot of years. And he never ever encouraged me to go into military service, or even really talked about his experiences in war. But when I was getting ready to go to college, I applied 2 colleges. One was the University of Florida, and the other was West Point. And I really wanted to go to the University of Florida. And I got the acceptance letter from the University of Florida first, and my dad said, oh, let's wait. Let's see if you hear from West Point. And I got the acceptance letter from West Point, and I just looked at my dad's face, and I said, oh, dude, I'm going to West Point, right? I could not disappoint this man. And for him, it was, the only thing my dad really told me was the value of selfless service. And that one of the highest callings was to be able to serve a free people was just such a rewarding and important and ennobling experience that it was the most important thing he'd ever done in his life. And I think he became a policeman because he wanted to feel that same sense. And when he saw that his son was going to do that thing and follow in those footsteps, I think it was the proudest moment in my life, because I'd never seen a man happier or prouder. And so, on days like today, I just can't help but remember him and all the veterans who chose to serve, and you guys, and all you've done for this country. So I'm really glad we did this today. I'm never going to forget this day and never forget being with you today. So thanks for that. So Chad can probably add a lot of context on the legal issues, but I'd say there's a reason why we always opposed amnesty. And it's not because we're mean people and we're evil and we don't care about, but it's because amnesty and open border policies incentivize more illegal migration. And once you start that tsunami, it's almost impossible to start. And to me, the thing that is just literally unbelievable is just the fact that you say, we're going to give $450,000 to people who came across the border and endangered the lives of their children. Dude, why don't you just take out advertising? Because I tell you, the coyotes will. And so to me, this is just another example of an administration who actually has no concept whatsoever in what it actually takes to secure a border or have sane immigration policies. But it's a big policy issue too, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So this really upsets me because this notion that you're going to pay an individual for knowingly breaking the law, for knowingly coming across our border illegally, and that somehow, because you enforced the law back in 2018, that you now owe them upwards to $450,000 per individual. So if you're a family of 2, that's $1 million. That's close to $1 million or more. And so, what the administration should be doing is telling the ACLU, which has filed this lawsuit, no, we're not going to enter into negotiation or settlement of, talks. We'll see you in court, and we'll fight it out in court, because absolutely under no way is the U.S. government going to reward illegal behavior? Because once we do, as Jim said, well, guess what? The floodgates are open. You're going to see other lawsuits. You're going to see all sorts of crazy and wacky things, not only from the ACLU, but from other NGOs and the like. And just to level set, again, I get pretty animated on this. This is a lawsuit where the U.S. government has already located parents back in the Northern Triangle, have already flown them back to the United States at taxpayer expense, even though they have no legal right to be here in the United States, have paroled them into the United States for 3 years. So they get federal benefits, they get work permits, they've been reunited with their child, who again, they chose to leave here in the United States to begin with. And on top of all that, the ACLU says, well, that's not enough. We now need to pay them $450,000. And so this whole notion is offensive, at least to me. It's offensive to the men and women of the Border Patrol, because buried within that lawsuit talks about how the Border Patrol abused these migrants, abused the families, violated their rights, on and on and on. And what the Biden administration should be doing, but I don't know that they will, should be fighting it in court tooth and nail.
So I just want to talk for a second about how this ends, because I know, first of all, I know we're going to talk more China, and I know we're going to, at the end, talk about how we're going to fix all the Biden follies. But on this issue, this is how this ends. The Americans will elect the next president of the United States, and they will insist, they will not only give them a mandate, they will demand that they fix this, that they secure, whoever they are, they will demand that they secure the border and that they deport people. And one of the things that we have to do, which is why I'm glad Chad and Mark Morgan are with us, is we have to write a plan that on day one, the next president of the United States can walk in and in a credible, suitable, and actionable fashion on day one, start to fix this problem. And as soon as he does that, the problem will start to fix itself. The cartels will get the message, the immigrants will get the message, and order will start to be restored. This is one that can be fixed, but we have to walk in on day one and fix it. And I swear to you, Heritage, we will be ready to help do that.
Good. Thank you. Well, as I mentioned at the top, this is a huge issue, right? This is not just the border. I mean, Beijing is watching as well, right? Russia, Putin is watching what's going on and what our leadership is or is not doing. David, what are foreign leaders taking away from the situation right now, particularly China?
One word: weakness. The absence of a response to these sorts of issues are ones in where Xi Jinping sitting in Beijing or Vladimir Putin sitting in Moscow or the Ayatollahs in Tehran are in fact going to test us. They're seeing a messaging, whether it was through the horrendous egress from Afghanistan and how that was conducted without even the consultation with our NATO partners in undertaking that, or whether it's the border issues or Latin America more broadly or elsewhere in the Middle East. And so China is seeing an opportunity to go from, well, maybe 5 to 10 years ago we would have called soft power with the Belt and Road Initiative. You've all heard of that. That's their bag money that goes around the globe to influence events, to what I now call sharp influence. It's that ability to come in, but now with conditions clearly attached to it. So let me give you an example. Instead of smart cities, they come in with the message of safe cities. And having grown up in Latin America, I can tell you it is a very attractive feature to say you're bringing safe cities. Here's the deal with the devil in Beijing, though. They get all the data, they curate it, and go to the agencies that I worked with for over 3 decades and say, we're here to help. What it sends as a message is that authoritarianism, and I don't even want to give Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party of 96 million members even the recognition that they have values. They have no values other than bringing back the Middle Kingdom, and we are arch enemy number one. And it's with this sharp power. It's economic, it's technology driven, it's military, as we are seeing now, even as they have form-fitting exercises around our Pacific Fleet in terms of what they're going after. So it's all interrelated, and China is seeing this as a tremendous opportunity. And if you ask me what wakes me up at night, it's the Taiwan Straits. 90 miles of separation, and across in Fujian province, the Chinese, Xi Jinping says he will take Taiwan in his lifetime. Well, we know a lot of the Chinese leaders live to be octogenarians. But he's not sure that he'll live till 80, 85, or 90. So I would watch this very carefully, but that's the message taken from a weak administration.
Jim, what about when we saw what happened in Afghanistan and how, I mean, think of all the veterans, especially those who served in that part of the world, right? How does our military respond to all of this? And how is the administration treating the military in terms of making sure we have what we need to defend ourselves?
Yeah, so it's kind of a good news, bad news story. I don't know if we have the slide of the index of U.S. military strength. So this is a product that we've been doing for 8 years. We grade the military in the same way every year so we can give you in real time how our capacity matches up against our adversaries. This is critically important in terms of deterring China and Russia and dealing with Iran and North Korea. And what we saw was you had a strong injection in the Trump years that really addressed a lot of the decline. And that was great. Biden has come into office, and we already see some of that reflecting in this year's numbers. But he basically came in and said, I want to spend $5 trillion. I want to give the Department of Education a 40% increase. And defense spending was actually going to go down because it wouldn't even match inflation. Now, the Congress has actually come back with stronger numbers. I think we will survive the Biden years, but again, I think this is kind of like the immigration and border issue. We have to be ready on day one of the next administration to jump back into the game, if for no other reason, so the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans and the Iranians know that that we are serious. And so I think that's where we are right now.
Well, just to jump in on Afghanistan, obviously it's a big military issue, it's a big foreign policy issue, but it's also a homeland security issue at the end of the day. And so whether you have a Taliban-controlled government that's going to allow other terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, and others to reconstitute themselves and really become a safe haven there in Afghanistan, that they can then conduct attacks not only there in theater and locally, but can reach the homeland. And so now you hear government officials, Biden officials, start talking about, well, the threat to these, the threat from these organizations, these terrorist organizations to the homeland, it may be closer than we had originally anticipated. Yeah. Well, of course. Well, of course it is. And so it's not only, again, military, but it's how do you look at it from homeland? And, for the last, I would say, really since 9/11, we've always been concerned about attacks in the homeland, but a lot of what we've done is to project that overseas and work with our allies to address that threat. Now I think the dynamic's starting to shift, and we have to say, how are we prepared for potential attacks here in the homeland? And if you're a bad guy, if you're Al-Qaeda, ISIS-K, and you want to figure out how to get an operative into the country, well, you have a roadmap, and it's called the Southwest border.
Yeah. So I have to speak up for the trifecta. So you have the military, you have Homeland, and I will call out intelligence. The degrading of intelligence and the investment in intelligence in what is arguably the fourth era of our country since 1947, when the National Security Act was passed, was the Soviet Union till 1991 and its collapse, then the infamous peace dividend decade of the 90s, then the pivot for 20 years on counterterrorism from George W. Bush after 9/11, and now in the great power competition. And where are our intelligence budgets going? Down. How can it be that, as Chad describes, the dual threat of still the non-state actors like ISIS and Al-Qaeda, and the ability for them to plan and operate inside Afghanistan today to the degree that was unthinkable just 2 months ago, and then at the same time, this greater power competition of China. China of today is not the USSR of the past. This is one because of technology, AI, and machine learning, and the capabilities with the military side and their modernization is at a very, very different enemy. And I wish the administration would do one thing: stop calling it a competitor. That's what my kids did playing on the soccer field. Yeah. This is an adversary who wishes to take us out.
I want to go back to the transnational terrorist threat, because that is actually something that we can't wait 4 years to fix. The next 9/11 could happen tomorrow, because Biden let the transnational terrorists back in the game. But what would be great for these two guys to talk to is, while Biden has essentially put them back in the game, these guys should talk for a second about defense, right? So you've got Justice, Homeland Security, the FBI. What are they doing now that we've got this manifesting threat of transnational terrorism?
Not a whole lot, as far as I can tell. Look, there's still robust measures that Homeland Security and Justice Department and others have for identifying individuals, right? Our screening and vetting systems have been vastly improved since 9/11, but it's all about leadership at the end of the day. It always has been for me. And so you see where, whether it's President Trump or others, really understood this and talked about it and gave the department and gave all the departments a lot of leash to go out and to fight our enemies, whether it was here in the homeland or overseas. And this administration is almost putting handcuffs on those departments because they can't do that, right? And so one thing I would bring up when we talk about counterterrorism that we did during the Trump administration, which was highly successful, we put enhanced vetting requirements. So if you are an individual and you want to come to the United States, that you had to provide, or your government had to provide us passport examples. You had to provide a whole host of information, about 23 different data sets that we had requested. And so we started about this and we said, okay, what's a baseline? How many countries give this to the United States, even though we've requested it for years and years and years? How many actually give this? Well, about half of the countries around the world actually gave it to us. Okay, we'll say, well, that's a problem. So we put a process in place, and at the end of the Trump administration, all but 13 countries gave us that information. And those 13 countries were then put on travel restrictions that said, look, if you won't give us this data, then we're going to restrict the types of people that are coming into our country from your sovereign territory until you provide this information. And we put them on a plan, because some of them didn't have the capabilities, so we all put them on a plan to get us this information. And on day one, the Biden administration canceled that program. Canceled it. We no longer get information from those countries. Part of that process was you have to actually tell Interpol about your lost and stolen passports. A number of countries didn't do that. I can go on, but again, that's how this, I believe, administration is handcuffing and putting restrictions on the ability to protect Americans here in the homeland.
And what I would do is connect us back to the previous panel at the end of lunch. And the wokeness inside these agencies where gender identity or whatever, I can't even fathom what all of it is in terms of what is that higher? And the tone, we've all heard the expression, the tone is set at the top. That tone is set from the Oval Office on down on the gender, race, and all of that. None of those have ever won a war, and they've never won a war decisively. So those are the kinds of things that concern me. And when Dakota talked about his would-be potential Marine son in terms of going in there with 2 sons, I've had the conversation, would you join the intelligence community? And I'm not so sure now, after giving 33 years to CIA.
So DOJ is happy to go out and hunt down parents in school board meetings, but they don't really have time to go down and track down terrorists.
And other so-called domestic terrorists.
Yeah.
Well, it's even worse. Sorry, just one last point.
It's
again,
even worse. It's really bad.
So again, one of the first things the Biden administration did at DHS was saying, we're going to now investigate, we put a task force together to investigate domestic extremism within DHS law enforcement ranks. Mm-hmm. And my question is, based on what? Like, do you have data? Do you have evidence that says there's something going on? Nope, don't have any of that. We're just going to launch an open investigation. And so you can imagine what that does to the morale of law enforcement officers, whether you're on the border, whether you're enforcing law, in the interior of the country, wherever you might be. You're now looking at your leadership, and one of their first things they did was to launch an investigation into you because, they have a view that law enforcement could be extremist.
Well, we want to make sure that we get your questions in. So if anybody has a question, just put your hand up, and we have folks that will come around with the mic. And while we identify a couple of folks, I see somebody right up here at the front, Jerry. Let me ask you a quick question. What should we do about the Olympics?
We should not go. When you have a million Uyghurs sitting in prison camps that are akin to what Hitler did, and doing live organ removals, there is ethnic cleansing going on, and on that issue alone, let alone, we could find probably a good additional set of issues as to why we should not go and send a message. But I fear that will not be the case in February of 2021, too.
A question, I think, Chad, this might be for you. It seems with all the actions of the Biden administration at the southern border, distributing illegals around the country, bringing Afghans in without proper vetting, my question is this: aren't they breaking some laws with what they're doing? And if so, what can we do about it?
Well, sure. I think, perhaps the first law is the oath to the Constitution that they all took at the beginning of the administration. Unfortunately, immigration law, as you get into it, provides a lot of discretion to the executive, and in this case, to DHS. So there's a lot of wiggle room within the law itself. And you hear this from the Biden administration to say, no, we're still enforcing law. We're only enforcing it on the most dangerous people. Well, what they've done is they said, okay, 90% of everyone out there is now exempt. And we're only going to focus on these because we have limited resources, which is just, it's absurd, that notion. So there's a lot of flexibility that they have. Unfortunately, I've heard this time and time again, which is people, let's go after them because they're not upholding the law. That would be a difficult case to make, frankly. But it comes back to what's the right policy, what's the right thing to do for the American people and for the country, and how do you protect that? And it's without question, you cannot argue that what they've done over the last 10 months, whether it's on the border or in Afghanistan, is actually making the country more secure and more safe. No one can make that argument. And I think that alone is what folks should be focusing on.
Got a couple in here.
Yeah, I've got a question. I think it's probably for Mr. Shedd. And that is, we all as Americans became very acutely aware of our dependence on semiconductors, the chips, this past year because of the shortages and the dependence that we have on Taiwan for production of chips. They go into so many parts of our industry today, our well-being. I think Americans are less well familiar with our dependence on China for the production of pharmaceuticals and generics. And I'd like to know if you could speak more, perhaps a little bit more expansively, on the U.S. vulnerability to dependence on China for critical elements of our prosperity.
Sure, but I think I need to go back to school to figure out what a supply chain is, according to the president. No, as you say, as chairman of the Draper Laboratory of MIT, I can tell you the microchip issue is a huge challenge for the United States in all kinds of industry, and you see it in the auto markets and that side of things. On the pharmaceuticals, I think the wake-up call that the pandemic has really brought home is, again, this dependency in the supply chain on China in ways that is something that puts our national security at risk. And I'm reminded, having gone to undergraduate school in Pittsburgh, or outside of Pittsburgh, when the steel mills were all collapsing, of how the dependency on foreign steel, something so critical and vital to our nation in terms of its build-out, was going off to Asia and other locations as well. And so I think, again, do I have hope that this administration will turn that around? I don't think so. Mm-hmm. But it goes right up there on the list that Jim has of what on day one does this new administration with a Republican president running the country from atop put as a high priority, and it's the supply chain and this getting away from this dependency on China.
Do we have the China report?
Transparency, yeah. We can put that slide up.
The transparency.
Because this gets actually directly to your question, because the number one problem is most people don't know what the Chinese are doing. So this is the only product in the world like this. We collate with over 100 global stakeholders all the publicly available information on China, all the open source literature. We consolidate that, and then we also publish an annual report. We look at 8 different areas of all the Chinese activity, both domestic and foreign policy, and we detail, here's what we know about China, here's how much we know, and here's what we can do with the information. It is literally the only resource in the world that provides that kind of information, and it is the first step to developing the countermeasures to China, which is, as you pointed out, is we have to understand what they're actually doing to us.
Yeah. And if you go to heritage.org, you can see the full
It's all
project
online.
there.
As with the index, the military index. Is all,
And it
military
provides a
index as well.
rating on each area of transparency in all 8 areas. It's a phenomenal.
very popular in China. No, I'm not joking. Seriously. One of the things that we found, we brought all the researchers together, was as soon as they published their research, the data that they use would disappear from the Chinese websites. So the Chinese government's actually reading because they want to know how we know what we know, so they can hide it. So it's a real cat and mouse game.
All right, I think there was somebody in the back. Yeah, go ahead.
I can't help but notice in one way or another, we are at war. I mean, whether it's cybercrime from Russia or the threats in the South China Sea where, economically, our fleets and shipping lanes could be blocked, tomorrow. What are we doing and other forms of warfare that aren't, with guns and rockets and things like that? What are we doing in the intelligence community to combat these kinds of threats?
Well, clearly the war of disinformation is profound and affecting the hearts and minds of Americans off platforms, and we talk about it a lot more in the case of Russia. China is very, very active in this, and much akin to what Chad said in terms of the reversals in Homeland Security, on the intelligence community, and I can't go into the details, but a lot of the authorities that were given to counter that kind of activity were rescinded. I won't say on day one, but in the ensuing weeks and months after the new administration took over in January, to pull back those authorities and bureaucratize the decision making. Well, we're at war on information. That is not going to work long term. You have to be able to counter that, and frankly, the intelligence community has its hands tied by the policies that constrain that, and you can all figure out that that's at a place called Fort Meade in the National Security Agency and Cyber Command and others. But it is a war of ones and zeros back and forth in that domain of cyber.
So I think of it when we talk about Homeland Security and what tools the department has, it's defense and offense. Every day we play defense, whether it's cyber, whether it's at the border, whether it's in the interior, Coast Guard, and the like. And so the department's very good at defense. What requires leadership is offense. What offensive things are we going to do to put our adversaries on their heels? Whether, again, that's the Mexican cartels, that's the different terrorist organizations overseas. And that's where I don't see any action from this administration, right? Because one, they're focused on gender studies. Two, they're focused on fixing a crisis that they created. So had they not done anything on day one and not rescinded any policies, we would have been in a much better shape than we are today. Obviously, so now they're trying to fix the crisis they created, which means they're not on the offensive when we talk about cyber, when we talk about our counterterrorism programs. What new policies are they doing to put in place to make the country more secure and to fight those battles that we're talking about? The answer is none. Instead, they're still focused. 10 months later, they're still focused on tearing down programs that were put in place in the last 4 years. And they can't get past themselves on that. And that's not, again, providing any additional security for the American people. We'll play defense, we play it every day, but you really have got to play offense and you've got to take it to the adversaries, and I don't see that occurring.
All right, do we have one more question? I see one, I think you can get to him, Alex.
You haven't perhaps said it, but why do they want to have so many million people come into our country? It's been said many times that would be one way to begin to control one government forever, so we never could get back in place.
This is like why illegal immigration?
Okay.
Why they're so for it?
So we get that question a lot too. I do, which is, okay, it's a crisis, it's an absolute disaster, but why? Is it intentional? It can't be intentional. The answer is it absolutely is intentional. So if you go back to the campaign and candidate Biden at the time, he campaigned on all of this. He said on day one, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And people are like, well, he probably won't do it. He's done it all. And so it's absolutely intentional. There's two reasons, I think. One, they don't believe in immigration law, and they don't believe in enforcement of that law. Why do I say that? Because there are groups out there, and they've hired a lot of people that are staffing their departments from these groups that want to allow any number of individuals to come into the country, reside in the country, stay here, and we'll figure out whether they have any legal right to remain here sometime in the distant future, and then we'll try to figure it out from there, right? That's not what the law says, so that's a problem for them. And then two, I think they want to fundamentally change, the dynamic of America. And you can see that because every once in a while, they'll let it slip. They'll talk about how, I think Terry McAuliffe did in Virginia, he talked about how the Hispanic population was 12.5% of the electorate, at least on his side, and he would hope that they got to 13%, because then that would give him an edge. So I think deep-rooted, they won't talk about it, but every once in a while they will let it slip, that they want to see these folks come over, get registered. That's why they talk about amnesty, and be Democratic voters at the end of the day.
Yeah.
1 minute?
Yeah, well, let me ask this before you give the wrap on that. Is there anything, David or Chad, that I haven't asked you about that you feel is important for the audience to know?
No, we're good. I mean, I could talk and bend your ears a lot, but I got 1 minute here, so.
Actually, one of the things, first of all, this guy is I mean, David had a tremendous career service. We were thankful for that. This guy has a lot of service left in him. He was a great secretary. We should thank him for his service. We should. Great. And, he was, so like Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense, these jobs are still, potentially open in the future, just saying. Look, just give me a couple of seconds. Let me tell you the 3 things we're going to do to win all this back, and then just talk for a second about your responsibilities in rolling that. And I only ask one thing. Don't tell Joe Biden. I want him to be surprised. The first one is, what we have discovered, and really the remarkable partnerships we have with the Heritage Foundation and working with people like Richard Wagner, is there's a lot of stuff that we can do at the state and local level. Even on our issues, right? Border security, China. I mean, one of the things Chad wanted to work on was looking at the Chinese influence in Confucius institutes and universities. We are in a process we are engaging with state and local governments about what can we do in states that care about the future of their country to fix this. I am so excited about the leadership of Dr. Roberts, because this is a strategic leader who really understands this and the potential, which is enormous. So this is a big growth area for us, and we don't have to wait to take back Washington, take back this country. There are states that are going to partner with us to do that. So we're really excited about that. So that's one. The second thing is I do policy, not politics, so what do I know? But let's just assume that the leadership of Congress changes in 2022. Oh, look, that's not a game changer in the sense they're not going to have a veto-proof majority. But what they can do is they can establish the next agenda. They can do unbelievable oversight. They can put the kind of legislation on the table to show Americans a future vision. So preparing for them to do that, that's a big job for us right now. So if the right people are the chairman of committees, doing the right oversight, holding this administration accountable, controlling them and restraining them where they can to keep things from doing worse, there's a lot that can be done over 2 years. And importantly, giving Americans a future of what could be. And then the third is taking the country back. And again, I don't know who's going to win the election, but the one thing that Heritage does better than anybody else in the universe is we know how to prepare people to lead. I mean, what you see Kay doing with Governor Youngkin in Virginia is we can do that on a national scale. I actually think we're the only people that can do this, to build out the infrastructure to help a presidential team come in on day one and have everything they need, whether it's people or policy or the infrastructure to do that. And we started on that job. And we started on it the day after the election. The day after the election, we started preparing for Inauguration Day 2025. And we're going to be ready. I swear to you, I promise. So what do you do? Well, this is different than it was when we talked 20 years ago when I came here. It's not about you supporting us and we'll come up with great ideas. Dude, this is all hands on deck. We are all in this together. You cannot pay to take this country back. You have to do as much of this hard work as we do. We need all of us and all the friends and allies we can find, and we need to all work together on this. And the other thing is that the days of the conservative movement being a buffet table, they're over. Like, I'll take a serving of pro-life and, give me some, tax reform and, maybe, term limits and I'm done. That's not going to work. All these issues, China, border, they transcend all of them and they all impact each other and they all impact all of us. So we all have to be in for all of the issues that are going to keep this country free, safe, and prosperous. So how can you help us? You can help us by helping us get those beachheads. Drag us into your communities, connect us with people, and work with us, get the information out, help us connect with this country, help us grow this movement. Look at us as your partners, and because we're looking to you as your partners. And so if we work at this together, and if we start really hard, and we run really hard for 3 years, we will have a way better America than Joe Biden deserves.
David, thank you. Jim, thank you. Chad, thank you. Please thank our panelists here.